Okay, but thank you very much for inviting me to come across. It was a very windy journey, but anyway, I managed to come across to talk to you this afternoon about how we could allocate resources more effectively in the acute care systems of the world. So a forward-looking statement, since we are now listed on the stock exchange. As said, we listed in Copenhagen, the Nasdaq First North, just before the summer break, and we made use of Västra Hamnen as our certified advisor. And I've had a couple of questions on why we decided to list in Copenhagen and not in Stockholm, which many Danish companies do, and also why we use the Swedish advisor. So just a few comments on that. We found that being a small company, it was actually much more preferential for us to operate in the country in which we were listed. It gives us a lot of synergies in terms of interaction with where we have the core of our investors, but it also is preferential in terms of advisors and so on and so forth. Having said that, we acknowledge that there was a lot of experience in listing companies here in Sweden, and that's why we chose a Swedish advisor for our listing. The ticker is Viro, as you can see. We raised gross proceeds of 75 million Danish kroner, so just about 20 million euros. We had a convertible that we converted in the same instance, but I'll get a little bit back to that. So what this is all about is about helping the acute medical physicians to safely discharge patients, i.e. Sending them home, sending the patients that are not in need of immediate care home a little bit earlier than they otherwise would have done. We use a biomarker so that we measure the amount of a particular protein called suPAR in the bloodstream, and we've developed antibodies towards this. We've taken out patents on the clinical application of antibody-used systems towards this particular protein. We've done extensive amount of research in this field. We have more than 550 published papers by now, and you can look them up publicly on PubMed. And we've tested more than 350,000 blood samples by now. So we have extensive knowledge about how this protein interacts in our body and reacts to different pathologies. Our products are CE-IVD marked. That's the classification for legally putting them in clinical use in the market in Europe. We also have clearances in other markets such as Canada, India, and Serbia, of all places. And we also have clinical customers by now, and we are getting out into the world with our products as we speak. The background to all of this is that we did some research a few years back where we established that between 50% and 2/3 of the 50% and 2/3 of the patients in the acute medical wards, they actually had a pretty low amount of this particular protein in the bloodstream, and that actually means that they are not in immediate risk of fatality, disease progression. It doesn't mean that we can send them all home, but if the medical physician is in doubt, he can lean against this result and make a quicker decision on discharging the patients. So that's very advantageous, and that was a little bit novel in the sense that some of the physicians became a little bit surprised about the ability to discharge patients early, but it's been highly welcomed because every acute care physicians acting in this field actually acknowledge that they have way too many patients that enters in via the acute care system and would be better off treated in an elective appointment that's much cheaper, and it's actually also preferential for the patients. Because if they get admitted with all other types of patients, they run the risk of comorbidities, getting hospital-acquired infections and so on, and end up risking spending even more time in the hospital. So we're not only serving the economical side of the equation, but actually also the patient side. We monitor this particular protein called suPAR by ways of our products, and essentially what we are measuring is the status of the immune system, i.e. the inflammation ongoing in the body. So this particular protein gets cleaved off the surface of various types of cells, blood cells in our system, and the more we have, the more inflammation we have in our body. And inflammation is underlying the body's response to something that needs to be taken care of, whether it's a cancer, type 2 diabetes, an infection, or any other type of illness. So that means that patients with a low suPAR, and if nothing else needs to be treated, can go home much earlier. What we are up against, or the tools that physicians are using currently, are the ones that you see over here. It's difficult to read, but it's typically known as patient triage scores, i.e. a risk assessment based on a numerical system based, for instance, on fever, awareness of the patient, and so on and so forth. But if you add suPAR to this, it actually becomes a much better prediction. We know that these systems are pretty good for assessing the in-hospital risk, but it doesn't really take into account what happens to the patient a little bit further on, like 30 and 90 days. So that's where suPAR really adds value to the equation. It's also a very swift way of assessing this. Some of these triaging systems actually takes quite a long time to conduct. We can measure in 20 minutes. And as said, especially for the younger physicians, it's a very valuable tool to lean against when deciding to discharge patients. This is, I admit, a little bit corny, if you like. It's medical data, but it illustrates what I just explained about the value of suPAR. So, by far the majority of patients, i.e. about 2/3 of them, are up here with a very good prognosis, which means that they have a prognosis completely similar to the background population, i.e. no higher risk of mortality than their peer group. Whereas the patients with a very high suPAR, like up here, actually have a risk of mortality, i.e. that they die in 90 days of 50%. So often these patients present with sepsis, blood infections, organ failures, and so on. So they're the most diseased patients, but they're very few. But it's just to illustrate that this is the predictability of the high suPARs, whereas this is actually where we focus the vast majority of the patients that can go home earlier than they do currently. In terms of the market potential, we are obviously this is an international system that can be applied in any type of acute care system, whether in Europe or globally. But we've made some calculations as to the market potential, and it's basically based on the uptake populations of the potential hospital in question. So we're targeting somewhere between 2.5 and 3% of the overall population, and they would benefit from having this suPAR test conducted, because these are the ones not presenting in the door of the hospital, but getting admitted into the hospital and having blood drawn and prone to a further assessment. So these are the numbers that we're looking at in terms of market potentials, and as you can see, the cumulative value of the acute care market is about 1 billion euros. And then we also have other markets that we can attack later on, like the post-acute care market, when patients are discharged from the acute care wards or the hospitals in general and taken care of a little bit later, whether they need to go back to the hospital or are safe enough to send home to their homes. So we actually do not need to stop at the acute care, but also see the post-acute care being a quite interesting market. And we've also seen post-acute care facilities requiring a tool like this for the assessment of their patients. Super is even also applicable in the general practitioners market. So with the everyday physician, because essentially you've probably been exposed to a finger prick test at your local GPs, where you have your infection levels assessed, whether you have a bacterial infection or a viral infection. But Super is actually a much better tool for assessing the overall disease burden and the risk of developing chronic diseases later on. We have data from a study which shows that elevated Super is associated also with the risk of developing cancers, type 2 diabetes, and other chronic diseases, even in a 10-year horizon. So it's a very applicable tool for anyone to measure their health. We've also had recent data where we've seen the impact of smoke cessation, for instance. That actually means that Super levels drop about 1 nanograms per mil. So it's a very elegant tool for smoking cessation, for change of lifestyle, giving up on fatty diets and drinking and so on, because it's actually a tool that can measure that you're on the right path to health. So we also foresee that the private healthcare test market will be applicable to us at some point. We need some further product development to be able to approach this market, but it's certainly an interesting market for the general biomarker. We've done a very big study in Denmark comprising 16,000 patients in 2 different hospitals, where we basically measured the effect of utilizing our product compared to not utilizing the product, just like any type of pharma trial. It's not so often done with in vitro diagnostics, but we undertook this a while back. And we actually showed that the patients got discharged 6.5 hours earlier when our product was used. And therefore, we can actually calculate the savings for the hospital systems globally based on these figures. And it obviously relates to the cost of a hospital bed, which varies very much across the different countries and markets. So like a market like Denmark and probably also Sweden, we've had a very thorough assessment of the weighted average cost of a bed in medical departments. And we can document that the system, by ways of saving these 6.5 hours per patient, can save up to about 87 million euros per year. And that's even the net savings after deducting the cost of running the Super tests. That's obviously much bigger in Germany, but a similar structure, quite costly healthcare systems. But even as you can see here in Poland, where the cost of a hospital bed is much lower, there's a net savings effect by ways of implementing Super. That gets even more elevated in the US systems, whether it's the private or the public health systems. It's actually even more interesting in the US because the payers, the pension schemes, the insurers, they pose penalties on the hospitals if they readmit the patients within 30 days with the same disease codes. So they have a very keen interest in making the right assessment the first time and not just dismissing the patient and readmitting them again. So we also foresee a prosperous future for us in the US, but we've not registered our products there. I can get a little bit back to that when we go through our products, why that is. In terms of what we raised the funds for earlier this year, it's basically to make use of it in a direct-to-market strategy in the European markets. So we are targeting markets with a high proportion of private players, where there's a need and an ability to adapt new biomarkers, and also markets with a shortness of emergency department experienced staff. So that's why, as you can see, we've devoted a lot of our love to Spain, because they basically have experienced staff on site at the acute care facilities for doing all kinds of analysis, whereas other markets are lagging a little bit behind. We also have trials, customers using our products in Romania and in Serbia, and that was the very early start. And then we're looking on to approach more of the European markets in 2019, and then spreading out therefrom. In terms of our products, this is our earliest product. This is basically a research product, so it's not really applicable to what we're targeting right now, the clinical markets, i.e. where the real patients are, but it's very good for doing the underlying studies. This was the product that we used in the big study that I mentioned, the interventional trial, a lateral flow system where basically a small strip test is used. It takes 20 minutes for the reader to read the results. So it's very adequate to use if you have staff on site with ability to run the tests. In terms of the like Akuten here in Malmö or the Danish market, this is the product that we're looking very much forward to the introduction of. We had the first product introduced over the summer, and we're doing a validation on some of the bigger machines and expect to launch the next version of it in Q1 of 2019. This is a so-called turbidimetric assay, which means that it runs on the big platforms from the likes of Roche, Abbott, Siemens, and so on. So those are the systems that the big centralized hospitals typically use to run all their other blood samples. And the advantage this poses to us is that the hospital does not need to change any of the procedures that they are currently running. They don't need to do anything other than having a barcode on the blood sample that they anyway do for all types of other analysis like CRP, bilirubin, hemoglobin, whatever you have taken. They simply put it into the system in typically a wall air post system that goes directly into the clinical lab, and there the machine itself knows which parameters to take. So this is the product of choice, especially for the Northern European markets where we don't have as much staff on site in the acute care departments. Having said that, I have visited Malmö, and you have a very good acute care department with a very good focus on triaging, and you can actually also run point of care, but you're kind of the exception to the rule of the Nordic markets. So this is the product of choice in most of the Nordic markets. In terms of the people behind, I'm the CEO. I've been with the company for 7 years now. I have a long background in pharmaceutical and diagnostics in Denmark and globally. I'm a lawyer by training, but I've spent the most of my time in the life science industry. We have a CFO who's been with the company for now 10 years. We have the co-founder, Jesper Øystein Olsen, who actually first did all the research, did the underlying assay initially and so on. So we're very proud to have him on board, because he's basically the scientific founder of the company and is pivotal in rolling this out also. And then the newest member of the C-level of the company is Dr. Thomas Krab, who's the head of our sales and marketing efforts. In terms of the board, the non-executive board, we have Dr. Lars Kongsbak, who was the CEO of Exicon, a listed company in Denmark that was bought by QIAGEN, a big diagnostics player. And he's the chairman, has been so for 3 years. And we have Bernd Utter, who was the chief commercial officer for that company, QIAGEN, but no links otherwise than that, who bought Exicon, and he has joined the board as well to oversee the commercial expansion. One of the co-founders, Dr. Jørgen Thorbal, and Lars Krogsgaard, who has a long-standing record in the private equity market with Procuritas, amongst others here in Stockholm. In terms of the proceeds, I mentioned that the bulk of the proceeds will go towards sales and marketing efforts, and this you can see on the pie chart here. About 6.6 million euros will actually go to hiring selected sales reps in the individual markets that we are targeting. In some of the markets, especially as I mentioned, we have ongoing operations in Eastern Europe. We will make use of distributors because it's a much more efficient way for us. But in selected key markets, we need control of the sales, and we also want to reap the entire value chain and not leaving too much for the distributor. So that's why the bulk of the proceeds will go towards the commercial execution. Then we have product development. As I mentioned, we've launched the first of our turbidimetric platform. We need validation. It's basically the same product, but we need to validate it on a few other platforms. So a bit of the proceeds will also go towards that. We will run some more clinical studies. Many of them are actually run by clinical institutions, and we can decide to sponsor them by ways of products. But the bulk of the cost of them are taken by the institution. So it's not like running a pharma company where a pipeline costs an awful lot of money to run. And then obviously building on our IP, we have 3 issued patents now for the clinical use of the biomarker. So any research can be done with no infringement of our patents. But the second that competitors would choose to enter into the clinical space, they would be infringing upon our patents. We've also last year issued submitted for a new patent based on the most recent data from our interventional trial. So we have coverage well into the future. In terms of the highlights from our most recent Q3 report, the first 9 months of revenue amounted to 2.5 million Danish, and that was an increase from last year. It's mainly from one customer, so it's not to overemphasize this, but we do have revenues already at this point, but we're looking to grow these as we go along. We obviously reaped a operating loss by ways of especially the IPO cost, which in the relatively limited cash burn comprised quite a lot. We had total cash flows for this year of 61 million, obviously due to the positive influx from the IPO. And then the financing activities is split, and as you can also see, the operating activities drains or has a negative effect on the cash flow. The net cash position as of 30th of September was about 63 million Danish. So we have quite a lot of funds after the IPO. But more importantly, I would point to the fact that we have 18 hospitals now in 5 different countries where they are, as we label it, testing super. That doesn't mean creating new scientific evidence, but actually making use of it in clinical routine to document that they actually, when they have the product in hand, can run the test. And actually feel that they get the value out of the product. So these are some of the customers that we're working with to implement them as regular and paying customers. One hospital chose by now to become a paying customer. It was a customer from Belarus that we had a very swift interaction with. The others have taken a little bit more time to run their studies. But this one actually decided to implement it, and we obviously very much appreciated this token of their convention into the super family, and we now have 2 clinical customers. Then, as mentioned, we had the first launch of our turbidimetric assay This was CE-IVD cleared over the summer, and we had a subgroup analysis of our TRIAGE-3 study, as I mentioned. This was the interventional study that showed that that we could save 6.5 hours of time by ways of utilizing suPAR. So this was actually the background for the entire IPO, that this actually documented that we had value in clinical use. Then post the Q3 report, we also had an observational study. That means a study looking back at blood samples that were collected, but showing very interestingly the interaction we have with these triage scores, the National Early Warning Score, the systems that I showed, where the doctors assign different points to the physiological symptoms of the patient, where we actually showed that those systems could be improved by ways of using suPAR, and we did that by ways of improving the triage scores by ways of de-escalating them or escalating them based on their suPAR results, and that actually led to a better risk stratification of the patients. So that's also very important for us in terms of our documentation. And I think I will leave it at that with a couple of statements from some of our key opinion leaders that we work with. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jakob. Jag har förstått att du förstår svenska så bra så vi kan ta frågestunden på svenska.
Ja, det går. Det går bra.
Så då är det fritt att ställa frågor för den som har. Jag tänkte kanske hoppa in med en liten detalj som du visade på sliden där. Det står ute i marginalen, så kunde man se vad ni räknar med att ta i enhetspris för testen.
Ja.
Och jag tyckte jag såg att det stod 20 euro.
Ja.
Jag förmodar att det är en ganska hög rörelsemarginal i produkten. Men hur ser ni på framtida, alltså hur mycket volym måste ni ha innan ni själva går med vinst, så att säga?
Ja. I will respond in English then, but if you allow. The gross margins for these kinds of products are relatively high. So if you look at our accounts as it is right now, it's about 80%. So it will definitely not go below that, but we haven't really reaped the total effects of going higher in terms of volume. So we should be improving on that with that kind of pricing. But in terms of the pricing, we have deliberately not set a very high price because we actually have quite a lot of patients that gets tested into this system. So if we price this at more like a pharma pricing, where we look at the benefits we were offering, like you see oncology drugs and so on and so forth, we could basically claim a higher price, but that would be at the expense of utilizing the product to the benefit of the system, because the physicians would typically then cherry pick the patients that they would utilize the product on, and thereby you basically lose the value of the product, because you need to decide on which patients do you want, and then you need to decide on them individually, and typically a more senior senior physician coming in. So that's why we've decided on a market price which is on par with some of the other competing products, if you like, in the market, like procalcitonin, which is a new market. It's sold at around 20 euros per test.
Ni har ju mycket väldokumenterade effekter, både på testet i sig men också för de besparingar som kan göras i akutvården. Finns det några invändningar som en potentiell kund kan ha? Finns det någon kritik eller någonstans där det stannar upp så de ändå inte väljer att köpa in produkten?
It's a conservative market we are targeting. The medical field is conservative by nature. It's not one, and you can probably appreciate that we can't be guinea pigs into any system. So they require quite a bit of convincing, and that's also why we decide to offer 200 tests free of charge to the physicians, so that they actually can use it in their own systems. That's a very beneficial thing for us. Some of the arguments against it, especially in our parts of the world, is that it's been proving difficult for hospitals to sit and do the individual measurements that I mentioned with this product, the lateral flow test. So we are likely overcoming that with the brand new product, the turbidimetric product, because that basically does not offer any other hands-on because it goes directly into the platforms. So I would say the majority of the objections we've heard has been to the manual handling of samples, and that we've overcome now.
Är det någon som vill ha en sista fråga? Om inte så säger vi tusen tack till dig, Jakob.
Ja, tack. Tack för det.